Wheels up. Welcome back to the KATALYST podcast. We are continuing in the Against All Odds series. And again, just to unpack that a little bit before we get going, it's about telling the story and going alongside a journey of something that's in the face of adversity, that's overcoming challenges. Maybe they were foreseen, maybe they weren't. But we're really excited to have Brian Adams here with us today. And as we talk through his journey and kind of where he's at, I'm excited to hear his story. Brian, I definitely, I'm glad to have you on and glad we got to connect recently and glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think this will be a very good conversation.
Yeah, and again, it was nice to get connected, both being in kind of the greater Nashville area. It's awesome to have this platform and ways of, connecting, even though, we're geographically close, but we haven't met in person yet. But anyway, glad to have you here. If you can, just to kind of get us going, 30,000 foot view of Brian Adams and just the general synopsis of your story up to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a New Yorker who married a Nashville girl. That's how I ended up down here in Middle Tennessee. As my wife likes to tell me, it's the best decision I ever made in my life. So she's a true Nashville native. Once we got serious, it was kind of non-negotiable that we would move back within 5 miles of where she grew up, et cetera, et cetera. Her whole family's down here. Mm-hmm. So we did the Northeast thing for a little bit. I went to law school up in Boston and practiced law for a couple of years down here in Nashville. And then my wife's family has a family office that has invested in commercial real estate for the last 25, 30 years. And so I got exposure to the asset class through mostly being a limited partner investor with different GPs and sponsors and fund managers. So kind of fell into the business through the family relationships and then connected with my business partner, who is also a Long Island guy that married a Brentwood girl, which for those listening, Brentwood is, a community just outside of Nashville. Mm-hmm. And we started our company 10 years ago, and we can get into the nitty gritty. I'm sure we will, but basically over the last decade, we've amassed a portfolio of about 2.5 million square feet of mostly commercial real estate across 12 markets, all in the Southeast and Midwest, secondary markets for the most part. And we raise capital on a deal by deal basis. So we have a network of individuals and families and boutique wealth management firms that participate in just the one particular asset or building that we're investing in. So I'll press pause there, but that's kind of who I am, what we do on a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that intro. So you mentioned law school in Boston and then spent some time practicing. And I know just based on me getting to know you, ask questions, and of course looked at your LinkedIn profile, I did see the quote of you're a recovering attorney. Yeah. Can you just kind of unpack that for us a bit?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting with COVID. I've been doing a lot of hopefully productive mentorship with some other alums for my college or recent graduates or maybe current students. I played lacrosse there, so I've got a program that I do with some of the lacrosse players. Mm-hmm. And that question comes up a lot, should I go to law school, blah, blah. And I certainly learned a lot, but learned pretty quickly that practicing law was not going to be what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I got there, and maybe this is helpful for some of your listeners, by doing what I now know are informational interviews. But at the time, I was just having coffee or drinks with older guys, mm-hmm. talking about what their day-to-day looked like. And originally, it started out just my organization within the district attorney's office, which is where I was practicing. And that's kind of a gig where you work for either 5 years or 50 years. And I would have, beers with one of the lifers. And after talking to them for a little bit, I just knew that was not the path I wanted to go down. And so I thought, well, I'll transition into corporate life. And because I married to a very affluent family, I was able to have coffee with pretty much every partner at all the big firms in town. Mm-hmm. And I also realized, man, I don't want to do that either long-term. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I kind of started exploring being an entrepreneur and looking at different asset classes, different business models, learning about the real estate business itself, not just by being an investor, but by being a sponsor and operator.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting. I talked about this on a show recently of, they said the same question, you're a recovering attorney. And I said, yeah, but I didn't actually retire my license until probably 5 or 6 years into being an entrepreneur, just
Mm-hmm.
because I was pretty scared. And it also was hard on the ego to give up something that you spend a lot of time and money on. And in some ways, it felt like I had failed because I didn't pursue a legal career, and my father's an attorney, and it was hard to give that up.
Mm.
But I've come to terms with that, and I feel very comfortable with my license being retired. So I no longer give legal advice, whatever I say on the show.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I appreciate you laying that out for us. It certainly seems like a big pivot, right? I mean, obviously when you hear your story, it's natural from the sense of having those connections and going from practicing law to heading down that commercial real estate path. On paper, it may seem a little bit further apart, but when you hear your story, that's really cool to have that connection and be able to. And I think one thing that I would want my listeners to really draw, just if nothing else, in this first part of hearing you tell the story, is you were intentional about meeting with people and networking and having those informational meetings where you get to almost kind of look behind the curtain in a sense, where you're projecting yourself years down the road. You're getting asked questions that you may with who you're working for or with currently on a day-to-day basis may not have access to. I think that's important to be intentional about that, to whether it's an ongoing formal mentorship or not. I think that's irrelevant in some sense, where really it's about you being intentional, owning your own development, looking out, and asking questions about, okay, I'm interested in this, or this scares me, or this, whatever's relevant for your journey. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And I think obviously with COVID, it's very difficult, but hopefully when the world turns, we get back to having in-person meetings, which I think is really where a lot of the magic happens, frankly. And I would really encourage people, aspiring entrepreneurs, or even if you're considering making a move to professionally, one of the big mistakes that I made early in my career, really deciding about going to law school, was I was just decided I was going to go. I was hard headed and stubborn. And despite what some people in my network or family would say, just was my plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I'd taken more time to reach out to some people who were 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years out practicing law, and really just understand what their day to day looked like and understand how they make money, what they liked about the job, what they didn't like about the job. And I didn't do that. And it's a real shame because I have a great network. And a lot of people would have been pretty honest with me, I think, if you get them in the right environment. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd encourage people, if you're exploring making a move, whatever it looks like, take 30 days, 90 days, 6 months to go talk to people, and you'd be surprised how honest people are. And even more so if you are being an entrepreneur, there's an old adage that if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. So even if you're going to go out and pitch people, you're going to get a lot of people that want to tell their story anyways, even if you're not care about it. So you might as well get good about asking the right questions, because that's going to be a lot of what your job is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a lot of wisdom right there. I appreciate that. So, if you can just kind of share a little bit about, um, was it crystal clear that making the pivot to the commercial real estate thing? I mean, I understand the connection. You already described that a little bit, but as you really started to feel that tension internally and consider the entrepreneurial path, I, I'm just guessing, and this is probably more me than anything, but was there at least another option to consider, and what was the thought process there as you kind of went through that and considered different paths, or was it easy? Was it, hey, it's commercial real estate or law, here we go?
Yeah. I mean, looking back on it, the way I started the company and the risk I took was a little, I don't think I had that risk appetite today, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Now it's easy for me to say that because, we have 15 employees and all these kind of relationships and had so a little bit of success. But at the time, it felt really binary. It
Okay.
was like, I'm either going to stay practicing law or I'm going to take a chance. Because one of the things I did pick up from talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and people in the real estate space, you can't just do it as a side hustle.
Mm.
That if you want to grow something in a real platform and really be an entrepreneur, you can use whatever cliche you want to use. You could burn the ships, cross the Rubicon, but you've got to make that mental internal decision of, okay, I'm going to go all out on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can give yourself a timeline, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And it's in many ways kind of a young person's game from that perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have as much to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Or you don't appreciate the risk you're taking maybe as much, which is probably a healthy thing. But looking back on it, I probably could have gone in a million different directions. But at the time, for me internally, it felt really binary.
Okay.
I'm either going to keep practicing law or I'm going to do this real estate thing, but doing it as kind of a side hustle or part-time is not going to get me where I want to go. And I'll never know unless I try. So,
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good distinction too. Just based on people I know, I think you there are people that are trying to do it as a side hustle, but are not going to get the results or get there as quickly as what it sounds like what you had kind of marked out for yourself. Is that
yeah,
fair?
it's totally fair. And one of the biggest mistakes I made in my career was working with a partner who was not 100% committed full time in what we were doing.
Okay.
And there was a drop ball on a development deal, I think largely because they were wearing 2 or 3 different hats and working on the weekends and at nights. And, um, and it's also, if you're an investor, can you imagine investing capital with somebody where it's not their full-time job?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it'd be really challenging. And that's a hard pitch to make, is
Mm-hmm.
you're asking me to give my resources to you, my hard-earned money, and you're going to continue to work your 9 to 5, but also you're going to be doing this. It just leaves a lot of room for error.
Mm-hmm.
And in this business, there's a lot of detail orientation that needs to go into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be very concerned if that was the case. And that's not to say that I would encourage people to try. I mean, I know now is an odd time to do something, but I actually think personally that next year is going to be kind of a record year for new companies and new ideas and new entrepreneurs to go out there, because they've realized what they're doing day to day is not sparking the fire internally for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes when your world gets disrupted and you don't expect it, whether that's a project, it doesn't have to be macro, right? You can use micro examples. Um, that tension, that uncertainty, that crisis, if it is, it forces you to look at things differently, forces you to be more creative, and yeah, I think probably reflect on things that you haven't had the time or taken the time to reflect on as well. So I agree. I think it'll be fascinating to see, over the next year or two, what really was, being cultivated during this time, and what will come out of it.
Yeah. And as somebody I'm 38, so, you know, lived through 2008 as a professional. And one of the reasons I started the company was I never wanted to be in a position where somebody could come into my office and say, hey, you need to put all your stuff in this cardboard box.
Mm.
And the reasoning and the rationale behind being forced to do that had nothing to do with my work product or my effort level, that it
Mm-hmm.
just was these outside influencing factors leveraging that. And I
Mm-hmm.
never wanted to be put in that position before. I felt much more comfortable managing, to some extent, my own destiny. And I think you'll see a lot of that as well, where people just don't want to be held hostage by these outside forces or third parties that they have no control over.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that happening.